So we're about 2 weeks removed from UFC 276, where Israel Adesanya beat Jared Cannonier for his middleweight title. And something that I've noticed recently, and this hasn't just come in the past week or few weeks, this has happened maybe over the last year. And what I've noticed is, if you go back a little bit to when Israel Adesanya first came into the UFC, he was this exciting guy, a very creative striker. They always said you never seen anything like this guy. The way he mixes up, the way he uses his kicks, the little spinning roundhouse that he used, the question mark kick, this variety in his attacks. He was like his nickname suggests, he was the last style bender. He was so stylish to watch, he was so great. But recently I've noticed that people have seriously turned on this guy, and kind of want to delve into why, because, and this isn't just something that I think, every fighter in the UFC that are popular is always going to have people who don't like them, If you look at someone like, Kamaru Usman, for example. Kamaru Usman's one of the best, but people don't like his personality that much. You look at someone like Francis Ngannou, people don't like the fact that he's kind of doing this whole NFT thing and trying to go to boxing and fight Tyson Fury. You look at back when Conor McGregor was on top, nobody liked the fact that he was this loudmouth guy who didn't have much respect. When Khabib was on top, people didn't like the fact that his fights, they wanted to see him stand and bang, and the fact that he dominated people so easily almost annoyed everyone. And so you can go with this with everybody. But Adesanya, though, really feel like it's turned, because there's a point, like I said, where Adesanya was looking like the UFC's next big superstar, and I think that's faded now. So I'm just gonna go. I'm interested to see why this is the case, because he has everything that you'd think to make a superstar. He's not youngish, but he's like mid-30s. He's still way off, I think, being washed or being old in this sport. He's, got the personality to an extent. He's quite, how would I say? He isn't somebody who is, he's in with the times is what I mean. He's on social media a lot. He does his little dances in the octagon. He has the whole anime crowd behind him. He's got a lot there. So, like I said, and he talks quite well. So there should be something there, but if for some reason it's just not hitting off. And just curious, I'm just going to delve in and see why that is. And looking at Adesanya recently, I was looking at a lot of these sort of stick that he gets. I've kind of mixed this into 3 points to why I feel like he's kind of started to lose people a little bit. And again, like I said, everybody has this, but with Adesanya, it really feels like people have turned on him. And like I said, just going through why, and I've arrived at 3 big points that I've kind of looked at. So the first point that I want to go for, and this is something that he's been getting some criticism of here. If you look at his last fight against Jared Cannonier, he got the decision, unanimous decision. Same thing happening against Robert Whittaker. Same thing happening against Marvin Vettori. He then fought Blachowicz and lost at light heavyweight, and then obviously finished Paulo Costa. But then he had the fight against Yoel Romero, which was also a very dull fight and a decision. And then when he won the belt, obviously he was a brilliant win against Whittaker and knocked him out in the second. So the key thing here, if you look at Adesanya's last 5 fights, you've got, like I said, Cannonier, Whittaker, Vettori, and if I don't count, actually no, we'll count the Blachowicz fight. So Cannonier, Whittaker, Vettori, the Blachowicz fight, and Costa. He's won 4 of those fights, and only 1 of them he got the finish in. And even if you actually then strictly go to middleweights, he's defended his middleweight title against Yoel Romero, Paulo Costa, Robert Whittaker, Marvin Vettori, and Jared Cannonier. 5 guys. He's only finished 1 of them, and that guy was Costa. And Costa, if you look at his game plan, kind of just stood there and accepted it with Adesanya, didn't really do much. And I think this is an issue. The lack of finishes, I think, is really starting to hurt him. And this happened with Kamaru Usman, I remember. People have very short memories, don't get it twisted. With Kamaru Usman, when he won the belt, he won it in such a dominant way that people kind of could respect it. But he then fought Colby Covington, which in one of my favourite fights ever, and it was a war. And he got respect for it. But then the fight after that, when he fought Masvidal on, a week's notice, I always say it's harder for me, in my opinion, it's harder for the fighter who's accepting the fight on a short week's notice than it is for the fighter who's taking it. Because the fighter who's taking it has nothing to lose. He can go in there and give it his all, and he'll get credit, either way. You look at, in the history of fighting, you look at even the big example of MMA will always be McGregor and Diaz. McGregor was the favourite, he was the better fighter in there, but again, the stylistic matchup's hard for him. Obviously, the cardio underestimated Diaz, and Diaz beat him on, 2 weeks' notice. Andy Ruiz did a similar thing in boxing against Anthony Joshua, beating him on short notice, And so with Masvidal didn't do anything, didn't win any round in that fight, but just got dominated and just got his, Kamaru Usman kind of just had him against the cage, beat him up in the clinch, got the foot stomps, got the little shots to the body, and got the decision. And he got absolutely tore apart. I never understood it, because ultimately you do what you do to win. I don't think that Usman would do that if you had a guy who he thought he could knock out. But ultimately that was the narrative, and everybody called him a toe stomper, this and that. He then fought Gilbert Burns, stopped him in an emphatic way, got dropped, and then came back and beat him. He then fought Masvidal and got probably one of the greatest KOs we've seen in the last few years. Then fought Colby in a great fight, and obviously now he's fighting Leon Edwards, and he's fighting guys now where he's starting to open up a bit more with his striking. But the difference with Usman was given guys where I feel like he had to strike. He was never going to go to the ground with Gilbert Burns, because Gilbert Burns is a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. He was never really going to grapple with Colby that much, because Colby and him they did grapple in the fight, don't get me wrong, but those two, their grappling kind of cancelled out with each other. And with Masvidal, that was the freak one where he really, I think, wanted to make a statement. And I think that's the difference. When you see someone like that do it, and then you see a guy like Adesanya, in all of his fights, so if you look at the Romero fight, go back to that one, Usman, to me, needed the finishes in that fight to try and get his support back. Otherwise, he'd be in the same place as Adesanya. Problem, what I felt, because you can not mirror it, but you could definitely look at some similarities. They both won the belt in very dominant ways. Adesanya knocking out Whitaker, and Usman being dominant over Woodley. You could, if you flip it for a second, and actually, you can almost compare Adesanya's fight with Gastelum and Usman's fight with Covington as two wars. Then they had two dull fights. The difference being, like I said, Usman did it because it was almost like it was a smart thing to do. The Romero fight was weird. It was the weirdest fight I've ever seen, because, as everybody knows, if you haven't, those two just basically stood in the middle of the octagon. Romero didn't do anything. Adesanya was waiting for him to come to him, and it just never happened. And it was really, really one of the most boring fights I watched. And I've always said, I think the blame has got to be more on Romero, because he's the contender. Adesanya is the champion. His job is to keep the belt. But to me, that at the same time, when fighters go for broke, they get a lot more respect. When a fighter, I don't know, if they have someone hurt and they just swing and try and get them out of there rather than play safe, there's a lot more respect that goes with it. And with Adesanya, he never really put it on Romero. He never had a point where he was trying to attack and engage him. Again, his game is to let you come to him and him to pick you apart, but there still really wasn't much there from Adesanya, and that's kind of why. And I think he got clipped in the first round, and you could even argue he lost maybe about 2 or 3 rounds up until point, maybe not 3, but definitely lost. You could make an argument to say that he definitely lost 2 in that fight, and that was due to inactivity. And ultimately, yeah, you can say Romero didn't do anything, but neither did Adesanya. It wasn't as if Adesanya was pressing and trying to do something. It was very much a stalemate on both sides. It's just that I think the onus should have been more on Romero to do something. Now, I think that fight, he just kicked him at range, and then after the fight, he kind of was talking about how he messed up his leg and that annoyed people. And you had Paulo Costa there in the crowd who was talking all this rubbish, and a guy in Costa who fights very aggressive and comes forward and tries to take your head off. It's just it. I think it got people against Adesanya a little bit, and I think because how that fight was, people almost looked at it and felt like he'd do the same thing again. But in the Costa fight, I think there's a difference between Adesanya and that Costa fight than there was in all these other fights. If you look at, he did exactly what he's done in all these other fights, Adesanya against Costa. Kept him at range, hit him with the leg kicks and opened up. The difference was there was more venom in a lot of the shots I think Adesanya was throwing. The leg kicks, and maybe it was because there was no crowd so you could hear it more, but you could really feel those leg kicks that he was landing on Costa, and Costa couldn't even walk in, and he cut him and hit him with, I mean, once with a beautiful head kick, and he really tried to press the action and almost force it a bit more to Costa, and then eventually got the finish with a beautiful sort of grazing shot off Costa's temple, and then obviously did what he did after the fight. And it makes you feel like, that was when people really, I think, were high on Adesanya, thought, right, now he's going to be this guy. Obviously lost to Blachowicz, which is what it is. But then since then, it's almost been like people don't really care, I don't think, as much about him as they did. I think that after that Costa fight, that was the biggest high, and I think since then, you've seen him fight Blachowicz, lost, fair enough, it happens, but then you also seen him fight Vittori, and it was a non-event. Same with, I mean, Whittaker was a decent fight, but still, some people actually thought Whittaker won that fight as well, which is an interesting thing. And then the Cannonier fight, again, it was, again, non-event, nothing really happened, and yeah, I know, the onus you could say is on the likes of a Cannonier or a Whittaker or a Vittori, but ultimately, people don't want to hear that. People want to see the champion go in there, show he's the best, and knock people out. Same way Anderson Silva did it, and I think that's why Adesanya has got that. So I think the lack of finishes, as to round my point off, is hurting Adesanya a lot. I think he's fighting Pereira next, seems like anyway. It's very, very risky to try and finish him, but considering this is a guy who did beat you and knock you out in your last time you fought each other, I know it's kickboxing, so it's different to MMA, but it's still a thing. I think this is something that I do wonder. I would definitely think he should not force it against Pereira. I don't think he will do, but if there comes a point where he gets desperate, or not desperate, if it's a bit of a stalemate and he tries to do it, that's where I think the danger could come. But I feel like he needs to be against Pereira. I think because of the storyline, I think it might sell itself, and I think if you can finish him in that fighting, kind of get that one back, I do think that would help a lot. But yeah, I think though, to my first roundabout point for Adesanya is the lack of finishes are hurting him, and he needs to finishes. I think decisions aren't boring. There's some fighters who have gone decision, who have had some great fights, but people love to see finishes. People love to see people getting knocked out, and even submitted. And I think what you saw, the biggest star in the sport's history was Conor McGregor, and he was knocking everybody out, and I think that's what people like. So yeah, I think the lack of finishes hurting him. So I think that's something that I think is really starting to damage your reputation and have people calling him boring. And I think this is why people are really switching off from his fights in particular. And that's why you had people like Chris Pratt, who was coming out, saying about how, he was talking all this big stuff. He came out with the Undertaker urn and everything, and yet he didn't do anything. And I think that's something that is hurting Adesanya. And Adesanya obviously always responds to this type of stuff, but I do think it's hurting him a lot. But yeah, that's the first though. And then the second point, and this is more of an interesting one because this is more of a psychological thing going on here. But I think Adesanya, when it comes to his trash talk, when it comes to trying to sell himself, to me, he tries too hard. His personality is I don't know him, so I can't say what his personality is like, but he strikes me as someone who, I don't know, I think he did talk about how he got bullied at school, and he almost, I don't know, he's into like the anime and stuff, and he tries to almost relive that now in his 30s, and you can do what you want, but it feels as if sometimes he's almost trying to be that cool kid and trying to come up with these catchy phrases. I mean, I got a few of his little things in my mind, like his quotes in my mind about when he knocked out Robert Whittaker and he says how he was in the nosebleeds and he's going to make his nose bleed. yeah, it's a play on words, but it's not really a good line. And he did make his nosebleed to his credit, but it still wasn't a good line, I don't think. And then you look at the sort of the line that was one of the worst I've heard for a while, and everybody I think agrees on this, is the line of how he's going to leave a prayer frozen like Elsa, which, as far as a line goes, it was just so cringeworthy of a line, I think. I like Adesanya, but it really wasn't that good. And this is where I feel like he tries too hard and tries to almost go a bit. Again, and also his line about Romero, about the Twin Towers, how he's gonna crumble at the Twin Towers. He tries to come up with these little catchphrases that are good, but and again, everybody tries to be like Conor McGregor nowadays and have the little catchphrases. But you look at the likes of some of the stuff that McGregor used to say. Look at what Masvidal even says about the super necessary. A lot of it's natural, and I feel like that's the problem. When you're natural, I think people like it more. I think when you are forcing it, that is when it really it rubs people the wrong way. And I think Adesanya, that line of the Elsa one was terrible. And I also think, some of the lines with Costa was pretty good, but it's still, when he called Costa like an overinflated balloon animal and a skinny ass Ricky might want to be, the stuff like that is good, but again, it feels like maybe he needs someone to bring it out of him. When he tries to force it, it just doesn't sound good. So I think he has a personality where I think he tries too hard and tries to put on people, and I think that's why he gets you see a lot of boos at times. He gets a lot of criticism, and I think you can see it annoys him. He says it doesn't. Maybe he says it doesn't, but you can see how he reacts to it. How, he is a showman. He tries to, play at the crowd, but as you see, even the reaction on social media, people are almost. I don't know. It feels like now they kind of expect his fights to be boring, and I think, if he was a bit more, I don't want to say likable, but if he was just a little bit more, again, I don't even want to say humble. You can be what you want, but just a bit more of a people pleaser. And it doesn't have to be, but if he was, I don't know. I just think I don't think the criticism would be as bad. I think, don't get me wrong, GSP was a lovely guy, and yet he got a lot of criticism. So they're not mutually exclusive. But I do think that if you could maybe get people on side, well, maybe you wouldn't get that stick, and you wouldn't get the people trying to hassle you, or not hassle you, trying to rip into your fights all the time and calling you boring and all this. Because again, he's a great fighter, but when you're trying to force your personality onto people, it doesn't, in any walk of life, doesn't work. And it doesn't work in fighting, it doesn't work in any industry, entertainment, music, movies, whatever. It's never going to work. And again, I think that's the problem. Sometimes I don't think he's natural. It's an issue Jon Jones had a lot, where he would try to be this nice guy, but when he started to be a bit more of a savage, I think people liked him more. They didn't like the nice guy because it didn't feel real, and I think that's what people want. They want authenticity, and I think that's the problem with Adesanya. He tries to be this cool guy who comes up with his cool sayings and does his stuff, and he can, there are certain things he does, I think dancing was pretty cool. I think even his walkouts are really good, but just sometimes it goes too far with some of the lines he said. It just doesn't feel right, and I think his personality, rubs a lot of people the wrong way, and that's why people don't really like him as much as maybe they could do. But but that's sort of my second point on this. I just think reason why I don't think people loses it, I think people are kind of losing their way with him, is that I think his personality is trying too hard. He's not really enjoying himself to the crowd, and again, he doesn't have to. He can do what he wants, but I think that's one reason why I think people are switching off on him, because you can be someone who chats all this rubbish. If you can back it up and show that you're the guy, people don't have an issue. But if you're chatting all this and then you're just staying at range and leg kicking guys to a decision, and I think that's the thing as well. His style, how he isn't really as creative as he used to be. I don't think as a striker, he doesn't mix it up as much. I think he he keeps it pretty much at a jabbing range, at his leg kicking range. He keeps it as his range, and he kind of waits for people to commit. And I don't think, in fairness, I don't think people really fight him nowadays with the intent that they're going to win. And I think if you had a guy who could do that, maybe it'd be different. But that, I think, is the big issue. You haven't had anybody who can really... I think the true Geordie, when he had Adesanya on his podcast, put it best. He hasn't had anybody who's put his finger on his chest and almost say, I'm the guy that's going to beat you. And I think maybe that would bring it out of him. But yeah, I think his style change is another... Not a style change, but I think that's another thing that you could definitely look at as to why. Because, they come to watch you fight. And if you're just leg kicking people at range and keeping it at the end of your jab because you're too long, it's still not the most exciting. And it's one thing about John Jones. John Jones pretty much take out, maybe before he fought the fights, after he fought Gustafsson the first time, up to the first Gustafsson fight, Jones was very exciting to watch, very dynamic, very creative, and never slowed down. Even when he was champion, he kept going, and I think that's the thing. Adesanya feels like he's almost playing it safe a bit, but again, I do feel like he's just one of those fighters. Sometimes he just needs the right matchup, but yeah. But anyway, second point though, like I said, I think his personality is trying too hard. I think if you're just natural, if you're just a bit more relaxed, be yourself. Don't try and force these little lines. Don't try and come up with these iconic quotes. Just let them happen naturally. He has a few. His line of how I don't... talking about how he fights, about how he doesn't throw and hope, he aims and fires. Like, stuff like that is very, very good. He has some good lines, Adesanya, but sometimes he tries too much with these lines, and then he goes up, out, and he's just out here chatting about alternate stuff. It just doesn't work, so... yeah, that would be it. And then the third point, it kind of mixes in a little bit with the second point, but in a different way. Talking about personality, Adesanya talks a very big game. And I think that's what annoys people. Adesanya promises a lot before his fights. He talks about how he's going to... Against Costa, he did a good thing of saying how he's going to make it look easy, and he did. He talked about, when he fought all these other guys, how he's going to put on a show, about how... He said after the Kanye fight that it was an off night. It didn't feel right. I think he said the same thing about Whitaker and Vettori. I think Vettori said he felt bored. Again, he comes up with these little lines after the fight, and he kind of promises you, okay, so the next fight, he's going to do something. But next fight comes, and he does the exact same thing again, and I think that's the problem. When you promise a lot, you have to deliver. Conor McGregor is the biggest star in the sport because he promised a lot, and he delivered on a lot. And I think that's what makes it great. Even when you see little things, like I go back to Kamaru Usman. When he beat Gilbert Burns and said next time he fights Masvidal, he will finish him. And he knocked him out cold in the second round. That is an iconic moment. And I think that's what Adesanya is trying to go for. But it's never come where he's put on an exciting performance. Since he's been champion, even the Costa fight, because a lot of people were critical of Costa for not doing much in that fight. It was a great performance from Adesanya, but it wasn't an exciting performance where you can almost... It was almost like he was just too good for him, which isn't a bad thing. It's the best thing you can have as a fighter, but I think that's where you would have hoped that Costa would have done more. And I think there hasn't been a fight, I think, where Adesanya, where he's had to really... Like the Gastelum fight, where he had to almost find that thing inside of him and prove to the people that he's a champion. I think that's what he's looking for. And I think with him talking all his big talk, I think he's kind of thinking, if nobody's going to bring it, he's going to try and take it to them. But the problem is he's never really aggressive with it. He doesn't press forward at Adesanya. He's not the type of fighter. Like Conor McGregor used to do that. He used to press forward and march you down. Oliveira does that. A lot of the champions today do it. But Adesanya doesn't do that. He's very much on the back foot. He fights at his own range. He never ever goes out of his comfort zone. And I think that's the thing. He never takes that risk. And he doesn't have to. It doesn't make sense for him to take risks. Some of the great fighters who have taken risks have been knocked out most likely. So, again, like look at Chris Weidman, for example, where he threw that. I think it was either spinning back fist or the roundhouse or something like that. And then Rockhold ended up taking him down and beating him up on the ground and finishing him. Taking risks sometimes it doesn't work, but the whole point of a risk is that when it works, it looks amazing. Masvidal took that risk against Ben Askren with the flying knee, and it worked spectacularly. And I think that's the thing. If you want to be a champion who's safe and defends his belt these many times, fair enough, but people don't really go for that. And when you talk this big talk about how you're going to finish this guy, do this to that guy, and do all this stuff and talk all this rubbish, that's got to be backed up in the octagon. And he backs it up by winning, but not by his performance. He doesn't knock out these guys. He doesn't leave them cold. And I think that is the sort of thing that people always tend to stick to, you know. And one thing that was interesting about this is that Chris Pratt, who's just I don't want to say typical Hollywood actor, but you know, he's an actor. And he had, I think, something along the similar lines of Adesanya, towards Adesanya, talking about how if you're going to talk all this rubbish and all that, and if you're going to come out like you're the man, you got to show it and not just play it safe. And I think that's something that, I don't know, I found it quite interesting that he would come out and say that, because it does show that he's not scared. But one thing I would say is that there is some truth, you know. It was very lackluster, the Kanye fight. He wasn't doing much, but again, I'm never one to criticise fighters for that, because to me, fighters do what you have to do. Your winning is your main priority. Entertainment-wise, some fighters, like Justin Gaethje is an example, who will go out there and want the fight of the night bonuses and want to be exciting. But Adesanya's not that. He wants to be great, and I think that's why he fights the way he does. He wants to almost protect himself. He's almost doing what Floyd Mayweather did, but Floyd Mayweather was a little bit different, mainly because, I mean, it's similar. The opponents weren't really at the caliber that Floyd was. You know, he had a few guys who were good, but again, like Canelo, who was weight drained and young. Pacquiao, who wasn't the same, but neither was Floyd, but I think he was just too good for Pacquiao. And those type of guys, they didn't really do it. But when you had guys like Ricky Hatton who would try and bring it to Floyd, would stop them. And I think that's the difference. Is that with Floyd, because you're in a sport that's, you dominated, you're a pound for pound king, you're the big star in boxing, you can get away with doing that. He almost created his own model over there in America, just fighting in Vegas all the time. Adesanya's trying to be great, and in a sport that is still growing, you're not at a point, I don't think, where you can do all this stuff and almost just, I don't know, I just don't think you can be that big a star fighting the way you are, the way that Floyd could. Because Floyd also, whilst he was a bit annoying at times for people, Floyd had that real arrogance to him that was almost annoying. And Adesanya has arrogance, but not like that. He kind of isn't stuck in a bit of a middle place of, he wants kind of to be liked by fans, but he also doesn't. He has a thing of, he's almost like he doesn't care. He almost shows like he doesn't care, but at the same time he does care. And I think that's where I think his issue is. I think if you pick one side or the other, I think he'd be a lot more popular amongst people. And to me, with Adesanya, he talked a lot of stuff. The Romero fight made me laugh when he talked about how he messed up his leg and was talking all this stuff, and it was as if, again, I remember Adesanya talking on Twitter after that, saying about how, oh, Romero's supposed to be made out of wood, but look what I did to his leg. And again, he hangs on, he's very petty, he hangs on to these little things and tries to make a big thing out of them, but ultimately, when you're saying you're going to finish Romero, do all this, and then you just don't do anything, the leg kick him at range for 5 rounds, it doesn't look good to people. And I think that's where my biggest, I think the biggest gripe is for Adesanya. And similar against the likes of Kanye, saying, you know, last few decisions, he wants to really put a stamp on this one against Kanye. He didn't really, there was a few times he was a bit more aggressive, but he didn't really go for the finish like he could have. And I think because, you know, he's kind of just cruising his way to victories, it's almost like, again, his fights are almost not irrelevant, but nobody really cares, because again, he's not creating those moments that he did when he first arrived in the sport. And I think that's the issue. I think when you talk all that, you need to back it up, and you need to show why you are greatness and why people should be paying attention and paying money to watch you fight. But yeah, that's just my thoughts on why I feel like Adesanya is kind of losing people a little bit. I'm a fan of his. I still think he's a great fighter, and he is a great champion. But I think, to me, they're just little issues. Like I said, I think the lack of finishes in his fights, that might change with Pereira, maybe, because Pereira will go for a knockout. He knows he can beat Adesanya. He's already beaten him. And I think the whole storyline with that fight as well, I think will create a big buzz for that fight with Adesanya and Pereira. So it definitely will be interesting to see what happens there. And I think, again, his personality as well, I think, rubs people the wrong way. Sometimes he can say stuff which he doesn't mean to be maybe hurtful, but he'll say it like the Twin Tower stuff, or he'll say lines that maybe he thinks are good, like the Elsa line, but it wasn't. Again, he tries too hard. I think he tries to force his personality, and it almost comes across as being a bit fake and not authentic enough. And I feel like if he made like a heel turn or something now and just started cussing everybody like what Colby did, I think it might work, because he has the face of a villain, Adesanya. I feel like he could rock that, but anyway, I digress. And then, like I said as well, I think him talking all this before fights saying he's gonna knock this guy out, it's gonna make it look easy, gonna be this and that. He's gonna put on a show, and again, his last 3 fights have been non-events in my opinion. None of those fights really were. The Whittaker fight was good, but it wasn't exciting, and I think he does enough to win, but he doesn't do enough to amaze, and I think that's the problem. He isn't almost trying to put himself out there and trying to be great and trying to create those moments. He isn't trying to go for the highlight finishes, which again, I reiterate, he doesn't have to, but people don't really love that. People don't want to pay pay-per-views to see a guy just, I don't know, leg kick his way to victory and be safe. They want to see that excitement, and when you talk that big talk, you got to back it up, like I keep saying. So yeah, but yeah, Adesanya, though, he's a great fighter and he's a great champion. I just think probably needs something to happen in his next fight for him, people to really come back onto him. And I think beat Pereira, you haven't really got many people left in the division. Maybe you go back up to like heavyweight, and maybe if he can go back and beat him there, maybe he can then and beat Prohaska, whoever's the champion at the time. Maybe then you may see fortune come back in his favour. But for now, he's kind of losing people a bit. But I do hope it comes back, because I think he's a great fighter, and on his day, he's exciting to watch. He's one of the greats middleweight of all time. I don't think there's a question. Whether he's the greatest, you can debate with Anderson Silva, obviously, is still the guy. But yeah, that's just my thoughts, though. And yeah, hopefully, like I said, Adesanya can get fans back on his side, and hopefully he can continue this. And we are watching a great fighter, a great striking specialist, and he will go down as one of the best. But yeah, just think he needs to fix up on maybe not trying to come out with the Elsa quotes and fight the way you fight, but maybe, who knows, he gets an opponent that fits his style, maybe he can then get the finish. But yeah, just my thoughts on the last style bender, and yeah, until next time.